The moment my daughter leaned into me at her own wedding and told me I was an embarrassment, I thought I'd hit the lowest point a father could reach. I was wrong. The lowest point came 2 hours later, when she called asking for $50,000, like she was placing a room service order. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually began, on a morning that smelled like wet earth and possibility, before I understood that everything I loved was already being stolen from me. It was mid-March, one of those Northern California mornings where the rain has just stopped and the whole world feels scrubbed clean. I was out in the vineyard before dawn, walking the rows the way I'd done every morning for 31 years, checking the dormant vines for frost damage, feeling the soil between my fingers, 22 acres of Cabernet Sauvignon climbing the eastern slope of my Napa hillside. Every vine on that property I'd either planted myself or nursed back from the edge of dying. My hands were stained the color of old brick, the kind of stain that lives under your nails and in the creases of your palms, no matter how hard you scrub. I used to be self-conscious about it. By 64, I'd made peace with it. Those hands had built something real. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. Vanessa. My heart did what it always did when her name appeared lifted like a bird catching a thermal. She was all I had left. After Caroline died 8 years ago, it was just the two of us, and these vines, and the quiet understanding that we'd survive because we had each other. Dad, I have news. Her voice was electric, the way it used to sound when she was 7 and had discovered a ladybug on a grape leaf, convinced it was magic. Austin proposed. We're getting married. For exactly 3 heartbeats, I was purely happy. Then I heard that subtle shift in her tone, like someone stepping carefully around broken glass. Mothers are supposed to hear these things. Fathers hear them too. We just pretend we don't, because the alternative is admitting our children are keeping secrets from us. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I said, pulling off my work gloves. Tell me everything. When did he? There's just one thing. The brightness in her voice dimmed, like a lamp turned low. His parents want to meet you, tomorrow evening. Dinner at your place. Not would tomorrow work or when are you free? Tomorrow, at my place, like a summons delivered with a smile. Of course, I said slowly. I'd love to meet them. What should I know about Austin's family? The silence that followed was the kind that carries weight. The kind of silence that tells you more than any words could. They're successful, Dad. His father, Roger, is a real estate developer in San Francisco, major commercial projects, very well connected. His mother, Charlotte, comes from the Wellington family. She said the name like I was supposed to genuflect, like it should mean something to a man standing in a vineyard at 6 in the morning with dirt on his boots. Sounds impressive, I said carefully. What time should I expect everyone? 6 o'clock. And Dad. Another pause, longer this time, loaded with something I couldn't quite identify. Maybe dress nice? They're accustomed to a certain standard. I stood there after she hung up, looking at the vines stretching out in neat rows toward the hills, at the farmhouse where I'd raised her after Caroline passed, at the modest life I'd built with my own 2 hands. Something cold and shapeless had settled into my gut, and I couldn't shake it loose. That apologetic tone in her voice, like she was already bracing for something to go wrong, it sat in me like a stone. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that the dinner she'd just arranged wasn't a meeting, it was an audition, and I'd already been cast as the man who fails it. I spent the next day cleaning the house with an attention to detail I hadn't managed since Caroline was alive. Mopped the floors, dusted the shelves, even polished the old dining table that had hosted 30 years of holiday meals and homework sessions and late-night conversations over wine. I put on my good shirt, the blue Oxford Vanessa had given me last Christmas, and set the table with the nice dishes, the ones Caroline had picked out at an antique shop in Sonoma the year before she got sick. For dinner, I planned what I knew: roasted chicken with herbs from my garden, vegetables I'd grown myself, a bottle of my Hain-Lermerchin Cabernet that had taken a bronze at the county fair, and a quiet nod of respect from a Napa sommelier who told me it punched well above its weight. Honest food, honest wine. The only kind I knew how to make. Vanessa arrived 2 hours early. Her BMW crunched up the gravel drive, and I watched her step out in clothes I'd never seen before. Designer. Expensive. Chosen with the precision of someone dressing for a performance. Her face was tight, with a kind of anxiety I recognized from when she was a teenager, right before a test she hadn't studied for. Dad, We need to talk before they get here. She walked through my house like a building inspector, her eyes cataloging every surface with barely concealed dismay. The leather couch, where we'd watched movies on rainy weekends, the framed photos on the mantel, Vanessa at 5, gap-toothed and grinning, holding a cluster of grapes bigger than her fist, the awards from local wine competitions, Caroline's reading chair by the window, which I'd never been able to move. "This is very you," she said finally, and somehow it didn't land as a compliment. "What's wrong, Vanessa?" She turned to face me, and for a moment I didn't recognize the woman standing in my living room. This wasn't my daughter, the girl who'd helped me harvest grapes every autumn, who'd come inside with purple-stained hands and juice in her hair, laughing like the world was made of joy. The girl who'd held my hand at her mother's funeral and whispered, "We'll get through this together, Daddy. The Prestons are from a different world, Dad. Roger's development projects are worth hundreds of millions. Charlotte sits on the boards of 3 museums. They have expectations." "Expectations," I repeated. "About presentation, about how things look." She gestured vaguely at the room. "At me. Maybe you could change into something more formal? And when they talk about their work, just let them talk. Don't bring up the vineyard too much. They might not understand the scale of what you do here." I felt something shift in my chest, like tectonic plates grinding against each other far below the surface. The scale of what I do. You know what I mean. It's not a big commercial operation. It's more of a hobby vineyard. 22 acres, 31 years. Wines that had won competitions, that had been poured at weddings and anniversaries across the valley, that had paid for her college education, her first car, the down payment on her first apartment. A hobby. "Vanessa, I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not. I'm not asking you to pretend." Her voice rose, cracking like thin ice. "I'm asking you to make a good impression. This matters to me. Austin's family matters. Can't you just try?" "Try to what? Be ashamed of who I am?" "That's not what I said." "It's exactly what you meant." We stood there in the living room where I'd read her bedtime stories, where we decorated Christmas trees, where she'd run to show me her college acceptance letter, and we stared at each other like two strangers who'd accidentally wandered into the same house. The silence between us was a living thing, heavy and sharp-edged. "They'll be here in an hour," she said at last, her voice gone cold. "Please, just please." She left me standing there, my good shirt suddenly feeling threadbare, my home looking shabby through her borrowed eyes. But what I didn't know yet, what would take me months to fully understand, was that this wasn't really about clothes or furniture or presentation. My daughter had already started disappearing into someone else's life, and tonight was just the first time she let me see how far she'd gone. I didn't change my shirt. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe pride, maybe something deeper, a refusal to erase myself in my own home. I stood at the window for a long time, watching the last light play across the vineyard, remembering. Vanessa had been 6 when we planted the eastern section. She'd insisted on helping, kneeling in the dirt with her tiny hands pressing soil around the rootstock, while I explained how these fragile little plants would grow into something extraordinary if we were patient, if we tended them with care. "Like magic, Daddy?" she'd asked, looking up at me with those wide brown eyes. "No, sweetheart, better than magic. It's work and time and love. Magic disappears. This lasts." She'd believed me then. She'd believed in this place, in this life, in the idea that something built slowly with your hands was worth more than anything you could buy. When had that changed? I traced the timeline backward like following a vine to its root. 14 months ago, she'd met Austin at a tech industry mixer in the city. He worked at his father's investment firm, or rather, he occupied an office there, and carried a title that sounded important in the way that titles designed to impress sound important. She'd been excited, calling me constantly. "He's so sophisticated, Dad, so polished. He knows the most fascinating people." 8 months ago, the visits home started thinning. When she did come, she'd glance around the house with a look I was only now learning to name the look tourists give roadside farm stands. Appreciative, but distant. Charming, but unserious. Like my life was quaint, a curiosity to be observed rather than a world to be shared. 4 months ago, she'd casually suggested I update the house. Just small things, Dad. New furniture, maybe. Something more contemporary. I'd laughed, thinking she was kidding. She wasn't. She'd been preparing me for this moment, or rather, preparing herself for the embarrassment of introducing me to people whose approval she needed more than mine. The Tesla arrived at precisely 6 o'clock. I knew the make because Vanessa had mentioned it 3 times in the last hour, as though the brand of car a person drives tells you something essential about their character. Through the window, I watched 3 figures emerge. Austin tall, sharp-jawed, wearing a suit that cost more than my best barrel of wine. Roger built like a man who'd spent his life winning and expected the world to acknowledge it with every handshake. And Charlotte blonde, angular, already scanning my property with the clinical eye of someone calculating square footage and resale value before she'd even reached the front door. I opened it before they could knock. Old habit, you greet your guests, you don't leave them standing on the porch. Mr. Cooper. Austin extended his hand with the kind of smile that never quite reaches the eyes. Good to finally meet Vanessa's father. His grip was aggressive, not a handshake but a statement. I matched it and watched something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe. Vineyard work builds a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself in gym mirrors or fitted shirts. It lives in the hands, the forearms, the back, the quiet kind, the lasting kind. Leonard, I said, please, come in. Charlotte stepped through the door and immediately began what I can only describe as an inventory. Her gaze swept across every surface, every piece of furniture, every photograph, every choice I'd made in 3 decades of living in this house. She smiled a precise, practiced smile that had all the warmth of a closed window. What a rustic home, she said. So authentic. Authentic. Like, I was a museum exhibit, a living diorama of how the other half lives. We like it, I said. Roger moved past the pleasantries and straight to what clearly interested him. Nice piece of land, Leonard. How many acres? 22. Must be worth a fortune these days. Napa real estate's been climbing like crazy. You ever think about selling? We hadn't been inside my house for 2 minutes, and he was already sizing it up like a horse at auction. Not interested in selling, I said. This land's been my life's work. Everything's for sale, at the right price. He said it with the easy confidence of a man who believed that was a universal truth, that every person, every place, every sacred thing was just a transaction waiting for the right number. Dinner was exactly as miserable as I'd feared, though not for the reasons I'd expected. The food was good. I knew that because I'd made it with care, the way I made everything. But Charlotte picked at her plate like she was conducting a health inspection, and Roger dominated the conversation with stories about his development projects, delivered with the assumption that everyone at the table found him as fascinating as he found himself. Austin played supporting actor, dropping references to investment strategies and market opportunities with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned to perform intelligence rather than possess it. And Vanessa, my daughter, laughed at their jokes, this loud, nervous laughter that sounded nothing like her real laugh, like she was auditioning for a part and couldn't quite find the character. When I tried to talk about the vineyard, about the fermentation process for the wine they were drinking, she cut me off mid-sentence. Dad, they don't need all the technical details. I was just explaining how, I'm sure it's very interesting to you, Charlotte interrupted, her voice glazed with a sweetness that could strip paint. But Roger was telling us about the museum benefit. It raised over $3 million for a single evening. Can you imagine? The message landed exactly as intended. Your small world doesn't register in ours. Your accomplishments are footnotes in a book written by people who actually matter. I poured the wine my Hangin Lermuichin Reserve, a bottle I'd been saving, a wine that had taken years to develop its depth and complexity. Roger sipped it, paused, and nodded the way you nod when you're confirming something unfortunate. Not bad for a hobby operation, he said. Charlotte and I usually drink Rothschild, but this has character. Character. The words sat between us like a small, ugly thing. They left around 10, and I stood on the porch watching their taillights disappear down the hill, feeling something I hadn't felt in 8 years, not since the night I sat beside Caroline's hospital bed and understood she wasn't coming home. That same hollow H, that same sense of something precious slipping away in the dark. But this time, it wasn't death taking someone from me, it was choice. My daughter was choosing to leave, and she was choosing people who looked at everything I'd built and saw nothing worth keeping. I sat on that porch for a long time, drinking my own wine under a sky full of stars, and I had a terrible, certain feeling that tonight was just the opening move in a game I hadn't even known we were playing. What happened next would prove me right in ways I never could have imagined. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I'd drift off for 20 minutes, then jolt awake with Charlotte's voice in my head so authentic, or the image of Vanessa's face, when she'd said hobby vineyard. The way her eyes had slid away from mine, like she couldn't bear to look at what she was doing. By 4 in the morning I gave up, pulled on my boots, and went out to the vines. That's where I've always done my best. Thinking walking the rows in the dark, feeling the posts and the wire trellises under my hands, listening to the valley breathe. Caroline used to say I loved the vineyard more than I loved people. She was wrong, but I understood why she said it. People are complicated. They change on you, rearrange themselves into shapes you don't recognize, make choices that leave you standing in a room wondering what just happened. Vines don't do that. You give them water and sun and honest work, and they give you something back. It's the purest transaction I know. That morning, though, even the vineyard couldn't settle me. I kept replaying the dinner like a film I couldn't turn off, catching details I'd missed in real time. The way Austin's eyes had tracked across the property when he thought I wasn't watching, not admiring, appraising. The way Roger had angled every conversation toward the land, its value, its potential, always circling back to the same question, dressed in different clothes. What are you going to do with all this? The way Charlotte had studied Vanessa, with the cold satisfaction of someone who'd acquired a useful tool and was pleased to find it functioning as expected. And Vanessa, my daughter, performing for these people like her life depended on their approval, laughing too loud, agreeing too fast, shrinking every time I opened my mouth, as though my voice was a threat she needed to manage. I didn't change my shirt, I kept telling myself, standing there in the dark among the vines. I didn't change who I am, but the harder truth was pressing against me like a bruise. It wouldn't have mattered if I had. Charlotte would still have called my home rustic. Roger would still have appraised my land between bites of chicken. I could have worn a $10,000 suit and served them caviar on gold plates, and they still would have seen exactly what they wanted to see. A simple old man sitting on valuable dirt, too unsophisticated to know what he had. The sun came up. I made coffee. I waited. Vanessa didn't call that day, or the next. By the third day of silence, I understood we'd entered a new phase. Not the phase where she apologizes and we laugh about how awkward the dinner was. The phase where she's decided I'm the problem and she's figuring out how to work around me. When she finally did reach out, it was a text, not even a call. Dad, the Prestons invited us to their charity gala next month. Fairmont Hotel, very formal. Maybe you could get a proper suit. Something tailored? This one matters. I was pruning vines when I read it, my shears steady, my hands doing the work they'd done 10,000 times. I typed back, I have a suit. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. That's the one from Aunt Marie's funeral in Hangin-Lamur, Dad. Please, this is important to me. Important to her. Not I'd love for you to come or it would mean so much to have you there. Just, this event matters, and you need to not embarrass me at it. I wrote back, I'll think about it. We both knew what that meant. She drove out the following weekend unannounced, which was new. Vanessa had always been the kind of person who called ahead, confirmed plans, respected schedules. But she pulled up the gravel drive on a Saturday morning while I was checking the irrigation lines, and she had that look again, that building inspector look, cataloging everything with her eyes. I brought you something, she said, holding up a garment bag. Inside was a charcoal suit, Italian, clearly expensive. It's your size. I checked. You bought me a suit. For the gala. And for the wedding. Whenever we set the date. She tried to smile, but it came out crooked. Consider it an early birthday present. I looked at the suit. Looked at my daughter. Tried to find the girl who used to help me bottle wine in the basement, who'd hold each bottle up to the light, and ask if she could see the magic inside. Vanessa, what's happening here? What do you mean? I bought my dad a suit. That's normal. No, I mean what's happening to us, to you. A year ago, you'd come out here and we'd walk the vineyard and talk for hours. Now you show up with a costume and a list of ways I need to change. Her face tightened. That's not fair. It's accurate. I'm trying to help you, Dad. I'm trying to make this work for everyone. Everyone. There's that word. What word? Everyone. The invisible committee. You keep making decisions based on what everyone will think, but I don't know who these people are. I only know they've convinced you that your father isn't good enough as he is. She stared at me, and for a half second I saw something raw move through her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or grief, or the particular pain of being caught between who you are and who you're trying to become. Then she blinked, and it was gone. I'm leaving the suit, she said. "Wear it or don't." She left. The garment bag hung on the back of my bedroom door for 3 weeks. I never opened it again. What I didn't realize at the time was that the suit wasn't really about clothes. It was a test not of whether I'd wear it, but of whether I'd comply, whether I could be managed. The Prestons were learning how to handle me through Vanessa, the way you'd train a dog through a proxy, pulling the leash from a distance. And my daughter had become the leash, without even knowing it. Austin started appearing around this time, always unannounced, always alone, always with that practiced smile, and his designer sunglasses pushed up on his head like he'd just stepped off a yacht. His Tesla would glide up the drive silent as a predator, and he'd emerge with his hands in his pockets, looking around my property with the relaxed possessiveness of someone touring a home they'd already bought. "Just thought I'd check in, Leonard. See how you're managing out here." Managing, like I was a caretaker rather than the owner, like the land was too much for me and he was generously keeping tabs on my decline. The first visit, I was polite, showed him around, explained the irrigation system, talked about the upcoming growing season. He listened the way people listen when they're waiting for you to finish so they can talk about what they actually came to discuss. "Must be exhausting at your age," he said, squinting at the western rows. 22 acres is a lot for one man. You ever think about scaling back? Selling a few acres to take the pressure off? Land's not for sale, Austin. Of course not. That smooth smile. Just concerned about you. Vanessa worries. We both do. He didn't worry about me. He worried about the timeline. Every visit, the questions circled the same drain. How much land? How much maintenance? How much longer can you keep this up? He wasn't checking on me. He was checking on his investment. By the 4th visit, I stopped pretending not to see it. I was watching a wolf circle a sheep pen, testing the fence for weak spots, patient enough to wait, but hungry enough to keep coming back. "Austin," I said, standing at the edge of the vineyard with my arms crossed. "I've been doing this since before you were born. If I need help, I'll ask for it." Something shifted behind his eyes, a flicker of annoyance, quickly smothered by that boardroom composure. "Just trying to be family, Leonard." Family. The word sounded foreign in his mouth, like a language he'd learned phonetically but didn't understand. Charlotte entered the picture through the phone. She had a talent for calling Vanessa at exactly the moments when I was within earshot, her voice bright and carrying, engineered to be overheard. "Darling, we simply must discuss the seating arrangements. Your father and I say this with love, might be more comfortable at a quieter table. The head table will have the Harringtons and the Blackwells, and you know how particular they are about." She'd trail off delicately, letting the implication finish itself. "Your father doesn't belong with important people." I watched Vanessa during these calls, watched her nod along, watched her agree, watched her apologize for me. "I know, I'll talk to him," like I was a stain she was promising to remove before the guests arrived. "Mom says maybe you could come to the ceremony and then leave before the reception." Vanessa told me one afternoon in April, studying her shoes like they held the answer to a question she couldn't bring herself to ask. It might be easier. Easier for whom? For everyone. There was that word again, the jury. The invisible tribunal that had weighed me and found me wanting, whose verdict my daughter had accepted without appeal. I noticed other things too, subtler things, changes that crept in like fog. Vanessa's vocabulary had shifted. She'd started using words like optics and brand alignment and networking opportunities. She talked about people the way Austin talked about stocks, as assets to cultivate or liabilities to divest. Relationships weren't relationships anymore. They were strategic positions on a board she was learning to play. One afternoon, I found her photographing my house. Not the way you photograph a place you love, wide shots that capture the feeling, the light, the warmth. She was documenting details. The scuff marks on the hallway floor, the water stain on the living room ceiling from the storm 2 winters ago, the chipped paint on the window frames. "What are you doing?" She startled, guilty, the phone pressed against her chest like a secret. "Nothing. Austin wanted to see where I grew up." But I'd caught a glimpse of her camera roll before she clutched the phone away. Close-ups of every flaw, every worn spot, every sign of a life lived modestly by a man who worked with his hands. She wasn't showing Austin where she grew up. She was building evidence proof that she'd risen above this, that she deserved her seat at the Preston table, that the distance between my world and theirs was real and measurable and justified. My daughter had become an anthropologist, studying the primitive tribe she'd escaped from. And somehow, I was the exhibit. The rehearsal dinner in late April confirmed everything I feared, and introduced a new terror I hadn't anticipated. The Prestons hosted it at a San Francisco restaurant that had a 6-month wait list and no prices on the menu, the kind of place where asking how much something costs is itself an act of vulgarity. I sat at the far end of the table, functionally invisible, while Roger held court about his latest project. Luxury condominiums going up in a neighborhood that used to be home to 3 generations of Filipino families. Progress requires sacrifice, he announced, lifting his glass. And everyone at the table nodded like he'd uttered something profound instead of something that would make a decent person sick. Charlotte had positioned herself next to Vanessa, and the two of them spent the entire dinner discussing flower arrangements, seating charts, and champagne brands with the intensity of generals planning an invasion. My daughter hung on every word, desperate to get the answers right, terrified of failing a test she didn't realize she was taking. But it was Austin who frightened me. Halfway through dinner, he caught my eye across the table and held it, and he smiled. Not the practice smile he wore like a mask, a different smile entirely. The real one. The one underneath. It was the smile of a man who knows he's winning and wants you to know he knows. The smile of someone who's already spent the money, who's already bulldozed the vines in his mind, who's looking at you across a table of expensive food and thinking, "Enjoy it while you can, old man." In that moment, something crystallized that had been forming for months. This was never about Vanessa. The engagement, the wedding, the elaborate performance of family, none of it was about my daughter. She was a key, a means of access. The thing the Prestons actually wanted was sitting on 22 acres of Napa hillside, growing quietly in the sun, waiting to be stolen by people who'd never planted a single thing in their lives. I excused myself early, claiming exhaustion. Nobody protested. I don't think anyone registered that I'd left. Driving home through the dark hills, I passed vineyard after vineyard, small operations like mine. Family properties built across generations by people who understood that some things matter more than their dollar value. Each one represented somebody's life, their legacy, their answer to the question of what you leave behind when you go. Austin and his father looked at these places and saw obstacles, quaint holdouts blocking the march of progress and profit. And my daughter, my Vanessa, my harvest girl, my partner in the quiet conspiracy of growing beautiful things, had started seeing them that way too. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the truck for a long time with the engine off, listening to the silence of the valley. I wasn't beaten. You don't survive 31 years of farming, drought, disease, bad harvests. The year the fire came within a quarter mile of the eastern rose, without learning something about endurance. But endurance alone wasn't going to save my land. I needed to be smarter than that. There's a principle in winemaking that most people don't understand. Patience isn't passive. It's not sitting around waiting for things to happen. Real patience is active. It's watching, preparing, positioning yourself so that when the moment comes, you're ready to act with precision. You don't rush the harvest, but you don't miss it either. My moment was coming. I could feel it the way I could feel weather changes in my bones, the way I knew by the color of the leaves when the grapes were ready. Something was building, and when it broke, I needed to be standing in exactly the right place. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't discover until much later, was that while I was out in my vineyard learning to see clearly, Austin was already 3 moves ahead of me. He'd been making phone calls I didn't know about, asking questions I hadn't imagined, putting pieces in place for a plan that went far deeper and far darker than anything I'd suspected. The wedding invitation arrived in early May, and with it, the beginning of the end of everything I thought I understood about my daughter and the man she'd chosen to marry. The invitation came in a cream-colored envelope so thick it felt like holding a small book. Gold embossing, calligraphy that probably cost more per letter than my monthly water bill, heavy cardstock with beveled edges. The kind of invitation designed to remind you, before you've even opened it, that you're about to enter a world with higher production values than your own. Mr. Leonard James Cooper is cordially invited to the wedding of Vanessa Marie Cooper and Austin Roger Preston. Dress code, black tie. Location, the Preston Estate, Atherton. I held the invitation in my soil-stained hands and read it 3 times, lingering on my own name rendered in someone else's handwriting, feeling like a stranger being introduced to his own daughter's life. I bought a new suit, not the one Vanessa had left hanging on my door. I'd donated that to the Goodwill in St. Helena without opening the garment bag. I bought my own, from a shop in Napa, where the tailor was a 70-year-old Italian named Enzo, who'd been fitting men for weddings and funerals for 40 years. He measured me without commentary, adjusted the shoulders, hemmed the pants, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw a man who looked exactly like who he was, a vineyard owner, 64 years old, attending his daughter's wedding with whatever dignity he had left. Not polished, not performing, just present. I didn't buy the suit because Vanessa asked me to. I bought it because I wanted to walk into that wedding as myself fully, completely, unapologetically myself, so that whatever happened next, no one could say I hadn't tried. No one could say I hadn't shown up. The drive to Atherton took 2 hours. My truck, a Hangin Lermuilem Ford, that had hauled grapes and equipment and lumber and everything else a vineyard requires, looked like a draft horse pulling up to a thoroughbred stable. The Preston estate sat behind wrought iron gates that opened slowly, ceremoniously, as though granting passage required deliberation. The driveway curved past a fountain that could have irrigated my entire eastern slope, past manicured hedges trimmed to mathematical precision, past a fleet of luxury cars, attended by valets in matching uniforms, who looked at my truck the way museum guards look at someone who's wandered into the wrong exhibit. I parked where they told me to park and walked toward the gardens where the ceremony would take place. 300 guests, seated in white chairs, arranged with military exactness. A string quartet playing something classical and remote music designed to fill silence rather than move anyone. Flowers everywhere, cascading from arches and trailing along the aisle, probably costing more than most people earn in a month. I found my seat. 3rd row, left side. Not the front row, where fathers of the bride typically sit, not even the 2nd row. 3rd row, aisle seat, positioned so I could presumably make a quiet exit if my presence became inconvenient. Someone had thought about this. Someone had decided, deliberately, precisely, that this was where I belonged. I sat down and studied the program, Vanessa's name printed beside Austin's in matching typeface, like they were already a brand. No mention of her mother, no mention of the vineyard where she grew up. No mention of any life that existed before the Prestons claimed her. She'd been scrubbed clean of her own history, presented to 300 strangers, as though she'd sprung fully formed from the world she'd married into. The music shifted, everyone stood, and there she was. Vanessa came down the aisle alone. No father beside her, no arm to hold, because that tradition was outdated. Her word, delivered in a voicemail I'd received 2 weeks earlier, casual and final, like she was canceling a dentist appointment. Dad, Austin, and I decided I'll walk alone. It's more modern, you understand. I understood. I understood that someone, Charlotte, probably, or Austin, or the committee of invisible judges whose approval governed every decision, had decided that a vineyard farmer walking his daughter down the aisle would lower the tone of the proceedings. And Vanessa had agreed, the way she agreed to everything now, quickly and without resistance. A person so desperate to belong that she'd amputated pieces of herself to fit through a door that was never really open. She looked beautiful. I'll say that because it's true, and because some truths survive even betrayal. Her dress was extraordinary, all lace and light, moving like water when she walked. Her hair was pinned up in a way that showed her mother's jawline, that delicate architecture I'd loved in Caroline and loved in Vanessa, and would love until I was dust. For 3 or 4 steps, watching her come down that aisle, I wasn't angry. I was just a father watching his daughter on her wedding day, and it was almost enough. Then she reached Austin. He took her hand, and I watched the transformation happen in real time. The slight stiffening of her posture, the practiced smile replacing the real one, the woman I'd raised disappearing into the woman they'd made, like watching someone step into a costume and zip it shut. The ceremony was brief. Vows that sounded like they'd been written by a marketing team, words about building a legacy together and partnering in excellence that said nothing about love and everything about branding. The minister pronounced them married, and 300 people applauded politely, the sound thin and hollow in the open air. Then the reception, and this is where I need you to understand something about what it feels like to be invisible in a room full of people who've decided you don't exist. It's not dramatic. It's not cinematic. There's no moment where the music stops and everyone stares. It's quieter than that, and worse. It's reaching for a conversation and having people's eyes slide past you. It's being seated at a table so far from the center of things that the waitstaff forgets about you. It's watching the world celebrate something you helped create while treating you like a footnote someone forgot to delete. Table 24, near the kitchen doors. My table mates were distant relatives of Charlotte's, a retired couple from Pacific Heights, and a woman who introduced herself as Charlotte's college roommate's sister-in-law, a connection so thin it was practically theoretical. They made polite conversation for approximately 5 minutes, established that I made wine, and they drank it but preferred French, and then turned to each other for the rest of the evening, leaving me alone with my place setting and the muffled sounds of a party happening somewhere I wasn't welcome. I watched the reception from that distant table like a man observing another planet through a telescope. Watched wealthy people congratulate each other on being wealthy. Watched Roger work the room like a politician, pumping hands, leaning in close, every interaction a transaction. Watched Charlotte orbit the ballroom, dispensing compliments and collecting debts, her jewelry catching the chandelier light with each calculated gesture. Watched Austin stand at the center of it all, relaxed and magnetic, the golden sun presiding over his kingdom's expansion. And I watched Vanessa. That was the worst part. She moved through the crowd with the nervous energy of someone taking an exam in a language she'd only half learned. Scanning faces constantly, checking reactions, adjusting herself, her posture, her laugh, her expressions in real time, based on what she thought was expected. Every few minutes, her eyes would dart to Charlotte, seeking approval the way a child looks to a parent, and my stomach would turn because I was her parent, right there, 50 feet away, and she hadn't looked at me once. I tried, once, to approach her. Made it about 10 feet before Roger intercepted me, drink in hand, that big developer's body blocking my path with the casual authority of a man who controls space for a living. "Leonard, having a good time? I'd like to talk to my daughter." Of course. But she's making the rounds right now. Very important to greet the Harringtons and the Blackwells. You know how these things work. He steered me gently but firmly back toward the perimeter. "Tell you what, I'll send her your way once things settle down. There's a great bar in the corner. Have you tried the single malt?" He deposited me at the edge of the room like a piece of furniture being moved out of the way for a dance floor, and then he was gone, and I was alone again, holding a glass of whiskey I hadn't asked for in a room full of people who'd rather I wasn't there. Around 8 o'clock, 2 hours into a reception where I'd spoken to exactly no one who mattered, I saw Vanessa break away from a cluster of guests and move toward my table. My heart did something stupid and involuntary, lifting the way it always lifted when she came toward me. Hope is the cruelest reflex. Even after everything, some part of me believed she was coming to share a dance, to have one real moment, to look at me and say, "I'm sorry, Daddy. I know this is wrong. I know you deserve better than a table by the kitchen." She reached me. She leaned down. Her face was close enough that I could smell the champagne on her breath, close enough that I could see the small scar above her left eyebrow from when she'd fallen off the tractor at age 9, and I'd carried her half a mile to the house, her blood on my shirt, both of us crying. "Dad, you need to leave." Her voice was ice and wine. "I'm ashamed of you sitting here in front of the Prestons. You don't fit in. Please go. I want to tell you that I said something wise, something cutting or profound, or at least coherent, but I didn't. My mouth opened and nothing came out because there are some wounds that bypass language entirely, that hit you in the place where words are made and destroy the machinery. My daughter, on her wedding day, standing in a ballroom full of people who didn't know my name, telling me she was ashamed, not angry, not frustrated, ashamed, of me, of who I am, of everything I am. I stood up. I didn't make a scene. I didn't argue or plead or cry, though all three were fighting for control of my body. I set my napkin on the table with the careful precision of a man holding himself together through sheer mechanical focus, and I walked out of that ballroom, past the champagne towers and the ice sculptures and the string quartet now playing something upbeat and meaningless, past the valets, who watched me go with the practiced indifference of people who've seen every kind of departure. I got in my truck, started the engine, and drove. The highway was dark and empty, and I drove with my hands shaking not from sadness, though there was sadness in it, deep and wide as the valley itself, from rage. A fury so pure and so total that it felt almost clean, like a fire burning hot enough to consume everything, even itself. My daughter had dismissed me, disposed of me, treated me like a piece of furniture that clashed with the decor of her new life. I made it home, sat on the porch, opened a bottle of my own wine, the Hangin Lamwitam Reserve, the one I'd been saving for something worth celebrating. This wasn't celebration. This was medicine. This was a man sitting in the dark, drinking something he'd made with his own hands, trying to remember who he was before his daughter forgot. At 11 o'clock, my phone rang, Vanessa's name on the screen, glowing in the dark like a small blue wound. For one pathetic second, one final, stupid second, I thought she was calling to apologize. Dad, you need to transfer $50,000 to my account for the wedding expenses. Roger says it's the least you can do after the embarrassment you caused tonight. $50,000. For a wedding I'd been hidden at like a shameful secret. For a reception where I'd been seated by the kitchen and then asked to leave. For a daughter who'd chosen crystal chandeliers over the man who'd raised her, and now wanted him to pay for the privilege of being discarded. I sat there on my porch, the phone pressed to my ear, the stars spread above me like witnesses, and something fundamental shifted inside my chest. Not broke, shifted, like a fault line finally moving after decades of pressure. The man who'd made excuses, who'd hoped she'd come around, who'd swallowed insults and adjusted expectations and tried to understand that man was finished. What replaced him was quieter, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. "See you in court," I said. 3 words. I hung up before she could respond. She called back immediately. I let it ring, called again, and again, 7 times total. I turned off the phone, set it on the porch railing, and sat in the silence of my vineyard, listening to the vines breathe in the dark. Tomorrow I'd start making calls. Tomorrow I'd contact lawyers, appraisers, anyone who could help me understand exactly what I was protecting and exactly what I was up against. Tomorrow the war would begin in earnest. But tonight, I just sat there. A father who'd lost his daughter, a man who'd been pushed to the edge by the people closest to him, and something no one in the Preston family had thought to consider, a man who'd spent 31 years learning that the most powerful things in life aren't built through force. They're built through patience and timing, and the willingness to wait as long as it takes for the moment when everything changes. That moment was almost here. And when it came, the Prestons were going to learn something about the old man with dirt under his fingernails that they should have figured out a long time ago. I don't break easy, and I don't forgive fast, and the land I've spent my life tending has taught me more about strategy than any boardroom ever could. The morning after the wedding, I woke up on the porch. I'd fallen asleep in the chair sometime after midnight, the empty wine bottle beside me, my phone still turned off on the railing. The sunrise was doing what it always does in Napa, painting the hills in shades of gold and amber, making the vineyard look like something from a painting, something too beautiful to be real. I sat there watching the light move across my land, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. Not happiness, not peace, clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop pretending a situation is something other than what it is. I went inside, showered, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. Old school, I know, but I think better on paper. I wrote down everything I knew, everything I suspected, and everything I needed to find out. Then I made 2 phone calls that would change the course of everything. The first was to Marcus Wade. Marcus had been my property attorney for 15 years. A quiet, methodical man who'd helped me draft my will back when Vanessa was in college. And the future looked simple. Leave everything to my daughter. The vineyard, the house, the equipment, the savings, all of it. A straightforward legacy from a straightforward man. Marcus picked up on the second ring, which told me he was already at his desk at 7 on a Sunday morning. That's the kind of lawyer he was. "Leonard, what's wrong?" I told him everything. The dinner, the months of erosion, the wedding, the dismissal, the phone call demanding $50,000. I told him calmly, methodically, the way I'd describe a vine disease to an agronomist, just the facts, no embellishment, letting the evidence speak for itself. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then, "What do you want to do?" My will leaves everything to Vanessa. The vineyard, the house, all of it. I want to change that. I want to protect my land from being sold the minute I'm in the ground. "You can change your will any time, Leonard. The property's solely in your name?" "Has been for 31 years. "Then it's yours to do with as you please." He paused the way lawyers pause when they're about to say something you might not want to hear. "But this is your daughter. Your only family. Are you sure?" She told me to leave her wedding because I embarrassed her, then called an hour later demanding money. "I'm sure about one thing: I need to protect what I've built." He exhaled slowly. "There are options. Trusts, conditional inheritances, charitable foundations. Come see me tomorrow morning. I'll have preliminary frameworks ready. I'll be there at 8. The second call was to Clayton Hughes, a real estate appraiser I'd met 3 years earlier at a wine industry conference. Clayton was one of those rare professionals who managed to be both competent and honest. A combination so unusual in real estate that I'd kept his card in my desk drawer like a talisman. I needed to know exactly what my land was worth. Not a guess, not an estimate, the real number. The number that would explain why the Prestons had invested so much energy in an old man and his daughter. Clayton agreed to do a full appraisal, said it would take a couple of days. I thanked him and hung up, feeling for the first time since the wedding like I was moving forward instead of standing still while the world hit me. Marcus's office smelled like leather and old paper, the scent of documents that hold lives together or rip them apart. We sat across from each other at his wide oak desk, and he walked me through the options with the careful precision of a surgeon explaining procedures. Option 1, revocable trust. You maintain full control, can change terms any time. Flexible but vulnerable, anyone with enough legal pressure could challenge it. Too soft. Option 2, irrevocable trust with conditions. You transfer the property into a trust with specific requirements that must be met before any beneficiary can inherit. Once it's established, you can't change it. Nobody can pressure you to change it. It's essentially bulletproof. And option 3, full transfer to a charitable foundation upon your death. The land becomes a permanent agricultural preserve. Nobody inherits it. Nobody develops it. It stays a vineyard forever. I sat with that for a moment. The nuclear option, beautiful in its finality, devastating in its implications. Tell me more about option 2, the conditions. Marcus leaned forward. You set the rules, specific, measurable conditions that a beneficiary has to meet before they receive anything. If they don't meet them, the property goes to a backup beneficiary, usually a charity. The key is that the conditions have to be reasonable and clearly defined. Courts don't like vague language. What kind of conditions? Whatever reflects your values, residency requirements, operational mandates, time commitments. You're essentially creating a test, one that separates people who genuinely care about the property from people who just want to cash it out. I thought about Vanessa, about Austin, about the difference between wanting something and valuing it. Let's do the irrevocable trust, I said, with very specific conditions. We spent the next 3 hours building it. Every clause, every stipulation, every contingency, mapped out with the precision of a man who'd spent his life understanding that details matter, that the difference between a good vintage and a great one lives in the margins, in the small decisions, in the willingness to get it exactly right. When we finished, Marcus looked at the document with something between admiration and concern. Leonard, this is airtight, but it's also going to make you the most unpopular man in your family. Marcus, they kicked me out of a wedding and demanded $50,000. I don't think there's much left to lose. He nodded slowly. I'll have the final documents ready by Friday. Witnesses, notarization, the full legal framework. Once you sign, there's no going back. Good. No going back is exactly what I want. But I wasn't finished. There was another piece of the puzzle I needed, and it arrived 2 days later when Clayton called with the appraisal results. Sit down for this one, Leonard. I'm sitting. $4.2 million. The number hit me like a physical force. I'd known the land was valuable. Napa real estate had been climbing for years, and my location, my water rights, my established vines, all added premium. But $4.2 million. That wasn't a vineyard. That was a fortune. That was generational wealth sitting in the soil I walked on every morning in my work boots. The market's exploded in the past 5 years, Clayton continued. Your established vines add significant value. Anyone buying this would be getting a functioning operation, not raw land. And your water rights alone are worth close to $500,000. You're sitting on a gold mine. I understood then, with the force of revelation, why the Prestons had invested so much effort in my daughter. Why Austin had appeared with his smooth smile and his careful questions. Why Roger had sized up my property before he'd even bothered to learn my last name. This was never about Vanessa. She was the acquisition strategy, I was the obstacle, and my land was the prize. Clayton, one more question. Has anyone contacted you recently about appraising my property? The silence on his end told me everything before he spoke. I can't discuss other clients, Leonard. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking whether someone has been shopping around valuations for land they don't own. Another pause. Then, carefully. 3 weeks ago, someone inquired about a property matching your description. They said it would be changing hands within the year. They asked specifically about subdivision potential, how many residential lots could fit on 22 acres, what the zoning restrictions were, whether the agricultural designation could be challenged. My grip tightened on the phone. Development potential. That was the focus, yes, not as a working vineyard, as a development site. I thanked him and hung up. Stood in my kitchen staring out the window at the vines stretching up the hillside, those patient green rows that I'd tended for 31 years, and I understood the full scope of what I was facing. Austin hadn't fallen in love with my daughter. He'd fallen in love with my address. The wedding wasn't a union, it was a hostile acquisition disguised with flowers and champagne. The business plan was elegant in its cruelty. Marry the girl, wait for the old man to die, or be declared incompetent, inherit the land, rip out the vines, subdivide the property, build luxury homes, flip them for millions. Vanessa was a key to a vault she didn't even know existed. And I'd been so focused on losing my daughter emotionally that I'd completely missed the financial predator already inside my house, measuring the walls. That evening I opened a bottle of the Hangin Lamuitam Reserve and sat on the porch watching the sun go down. The sky turned the color of young Pinot Noir, deep, luminous, alive with color, and I thought about patience. Real patience. Not the passive kind people mistake for weakness, but the active kind. The kind that watches and waits and gathers information and positions itself so that when the moment comes, every piece is exactly where it needs to be. Any fool can crush grapes and get juice. The art is in the waiting, in the watching, in knowing exactly when to act and acting with precision when the time arrives. My phone buzzed on the table. Vanessa. I watched her name glow on the screen, pulse after pulse, and I let it ring. She called 3 more times that week. I answered none of them. Let her wonder. Let them all wonder. Let the silence do its work. Marcus called on Friday. Documents are ready. Come in Monday to sign. I'll be there. I spent the weekend in the vineyard, working the vines, checking the soil moisture, doing the quiet, repetitive labor that had defined my life. But I saw it differently now. This wasn't just my livelihood. It was a fortress, and I was reinforcing every wall. Monday morning, I signed the trust. 3 witnesses, a notary, everything filed with the county. My mental competency documented by my doctor, who'd given me a clean bill of health just days before. Marcus had thought of everything, and I'd added a few touches of my own, including asking Clayton to compile a formal record of every inquiry he'd received about my property. Names, dates, specific questions asked. It made for illuminating reading. Austin Preston had contacted 4 different real estate firms about my land. Not a family property or a potential inheritance. He'd used my name, the Cooper property, like it was already his, like the transfer was a formality, and the old man with the dirt under his nails was just a speed bump on the road to profit. I was reviewing this documentation on a Thursday afternoon in early June, when I heard the sound that told me the next phase had begun. Multiple vehicles on the gravel drive. Not the usual rumble of a delivery truck, the expensive purr of a Tesla and a BMW, plus something else, a gray sedan I didn't recognize. I walked to the window. Vanessa's car, Austin's car, and the sedan. 3 people approaching my front door with the posture of people who've already won the argument they're about to start. I opened the door before they knocked. Not hospitality this time, strategy. I wanted them off balance from the first second. Dad. Vanessa tried for warmth and landed somewhere near desperation. We've been trying to reach you. I know. I've been busy. We need to talk. She gestured to the men beside her. You know Austin, and this is Mr. Pelton. He's a notary. We thought it would be helpful to have him present for what we need to discuss. A notary. They'd brought a notary to my house. They were so confident in their plan, so certain that the old man could be steamrolled, that they'd brought the person who'd stamped the paperwork before I'd even seen it. The arrogance was breathtaking, almost beautiful, in the way that a wildfire is beautiful right before it consumes everything you own. Come in, I said pleasantly. Let's talk. They settled into my living room like occupying forces, the same room where they'd sat months ago at dinner, barely disguising their contempt. Austin held a leather folder against his chest like it contained holy scripture. Vanessa perched on the couch's edge, hands knotted in her lap. The notary stood near the door, looking uncomfortable in the way that decent people look uncomfortable when they suspect they're participating in something ugly. Dad, Vanessa began, using the slow, gentle voice people reserve for the very old and the very confused. We're concerned about you. Managing this property alone at your age, it's a lot of responsibility. I've managed fine for 31 years. But things change. Austin stepped in smoothly, seamlessly, like they'd rehearsed this choreography. Property values, tax implications, maintenance costs. We think it might be time to consider transferring ownership to family who can handle the complexity. He said family the way someone says a word in a foreign language they've memorized phonetically. No comprehension behind it. Just the sound. Handle the complexity, I repeated. You mean sell it? Vanessa's eyes flickered. Not necessarily sell, but having options is smart. The Prestons have connections with developers who could maximize. Maximize, meaning rip out the vines and put up houses. Silence. Austin's jaw tightened, but his smile held. Professional composure. The mask of a man who's practiced deflection the way athletes practice drills. He opened the leather folder and spread papers across my coffee table with the flourish of a magician revealing the trick. We've had attorneys prepare transfer documents. Simple, straightforward. You deed the property to Vanessa now, retain lifetime residence rights, and ensure a smooth transition when the time comes. He slid the documents toward me like he was doing me a favor, like signing away my life's work was a gift I should be grateful for. The notary shifted by the door, his discomfort visibly growing. I suspect he was beginning to understand what this was, not a family discussion but an ambush, not a generous offer but a con dressed in legal language and practiced smiles. I looked at the documents without touching them. Looked at Vanessa, who couldn't meet my eyes. Looked at Austin, whose smile had the quality of something taxidermied, the shape of warmth with none of the life. Then I stood up, walked to my desk, and retrieved my own folder. Interesting, I said, returning to the living room. I have some documents, too. I laid them out one by one, methodically, the way you lay out evidence when you want each piece to land with its full weight. The property appraisal, $4.2 million. Clayton's report listing every inquiry Austin had made to real estate firms about my land. And finally, the signed, notarized, filed, and utterly irrevocable trust documents. I watched Austin's face as each document registered. It was like watching a time-lapse of a building being demolished, the structure collapsing floor by floor, the facade crumbling, the foundation cracking, everything he'd built falling inward on itself. The color drained from his skin. His jaw went slack. His eyes widened with the particular horror of a con artist, realizing the mark has been running a counter-con for weeks. 3 beautiful seconds of total silence. Then his voice came out strangled, thin, stripped of every layer of polish. What is this? This, I said calmly, is an irrevocable trust. As of 3 weeks ago, this property is no longer mine to give away, sign over, or transfer. It doesn't matter what documents you brought. It doesn't matter what your lawyers drafted. The land is in trust, and it stays in trust. You can't. I already did. While you were calling appraisers about development potential, I tapped Clayton's report. I was making sure there'd be nothing left for you to develop. Did you really think Clayton wouldn't tell me? We've been friends for years. Austin's face had progressed from white to a mottled, blotchy red, and in that color I saw the real man for the first time, not the smooth operator, not the polished son of wealth, but something smaller and uglier, a schemer whose scheme had just blown up in his hands. And what happens to the land? Vanessa whispered. She'd gone very still, very pale, watching the documents on the table like they might catch fire. Upon my death, the property transfers to a charitable foundation supporting small family wineries, unless you meet very specific conditions. What conditions? 5 years of working this vineyard. Personally, living here, tending the vines, learning every aspect of what I do. No shortcuts, no hired managers, no absentee ownership. And the land cannot be sold for 15 years after that. If either condition is violated, everything goes to charity. Every acre, every vine, every dollar. The room was so quiet I could hear the irrigation system running outside, water moving through pipes to feed the vines that Austin had already mentally bulldozed. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and dangerous. We'll challenge this. You're clearly not competent to. Then you'll need to prove that in court, where I'll present documented evidence that you were attempting to defraud me out of millions of dollars through marriage. Where Clayton and 3 other appraisers will testify about your inquiries. where the timeline of your interest in my land will be laid out so clearly that even your father's lawyers won't be able to spin it. I held his gaze. I believe they call what you did a con, Austin, and I believe the legal system has a particular interest in cons that target elderly landowners. He stared at me, and I stared back, and between us the air hummed with the voltage of everything that had just changed. He wasn't looking at a confused old man anymore. He was looking at someone who'd outmaneuvered him completely, who'd used the one weapon he'd never thought to defend against patience. Austin grabbed his folder, crumpling the useless transfer documents. You just made an enemy of the wrong family, old man. I think I made an enemy of exactly the right family, the kind I don't want anywhere near my legacy. He stormed out. The notary followed, practically running. Vanessa remained, tears tracking down her face. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt the old pull. The father's instinct to comfort, to fix, to make the hurt go away. But then I remembered, Dad, you need to leave. I'm ashamed of you. The conditions stand, Vanessa. If you want this land, you earn it, the way I earned it. She left without a word. I listened to the cars pull away, the gravel settling in their wake, and I stood alone in my living room with the documents spread across the table and the silence pressing in from all sides. The first battle was over, and it was mine. But I knew the way you know when storm clouds build on the western ridge that what was coming next would be far worse than anything I'd faced so far. The Prestons weren't the kind of people who accepted defeat. They were the kind who escalated, and I'd just given them every reason to come at me with everything they had. The week after the confrontation, my property went quiet in a way that felt deliberate. No calls, no visits, no cars on the gravel drive. Just the hum of the vineyard, doing what vineyards do, growing, ripening, indifferent to the human disasters unfolding around it. I knew what that silence meant. I'd spent enough years watching weather patterns to recognize the particular stillness that precedes a storm. They were regrouping, marshaling their resources, deciding how to destroy me. I wasn't idle either. Marcus and I spent hours going over the trust documents from every angle, probing for weaknesses, stress testing every clause. We found none. The paperwork was airtight, witnessed by 3 people, notarized, filed with the county, backed by a medical evaluation confirming my mental competency. We'd built the legal equivalent of a stone wall, and I'd mortared every crack. But I'd underestimated Roger Preston. I'd underestimated the reach of a man who'd spent 40 years bending the world to his specifications through money and intimidation. The first attack didn't come through lawyers. It came through my neighbor. Isabella Rossi owned the vineyard adjacent to mine, 26 acres of Sangiovese and Barbara that her grandparents had planted in the Motngin Chin Chumsao Muis. She was 71, sharp as a hawk, and one of the few people in the valley I trusted completely. She showed up at my door on a Tuesday morning with coffee and a troubled expression. Leonard, a man came to see me yesterday. Said he was an attorney representing your daughter. He was asking questions about you. What kind of questions? Whether you seemed confused lately. Whether your memory was slipping. Whether you'd done anything erratic or out of character. Her dark eyes were steady on mine. I told him you were sharper than most men half your age. But Leonard, what is going on? I told her. Not everything, just enough. She listened without interrupting, the way people listen when they've lived long enough to know that some stories need to be heard completely before you respond. They're building a case, she said when I finished. They want to prove you're incompetent so they can break the trust. I know. Then you need to be ready, because a man like Roger Preston doesn't just hire one lawyer, he hires an army. She was right. By mid-July, the legal papers arrived. Roger had retained Whitmore Associates, one of San Francisco's most expensive and most ruthless firms, the kind of practice that advertised its win rate the way sports teams advertise championships. They were filing a petition to have my irrevocable trust declared invalid on the grounds of diminished mental capacity. I read through the petition slowly, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee going cold beside me. The language was clinical, precise, devastating. Phrases like progressive cognitive decline and evidence of confused decision-making and inability to manage complex affairs. Supporting the petition was a sworn affidavit, and this is the part that nearly broke me, signed by Vanessa Cooper Preston, attesting that her father had exhibited memory loss, confusion, and erratic behavior, consistent with early-stage dementia. I read my daughter's signature on that document 3 times. Each time it felt like swallowing a piece of broken glass, the shards working their way down slowly, cutting everything they touched. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd put her name on a lie, sworn to it before God and the state of California, and handed it to people who would use it to steal everything I'd built. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from being lied about by someone who knows you better than anyone alive. It doesn't diminish. It compounds. Marcus called within the hour. "Leonard, this is serious. Whitmore doesn't file unless they think they can win. They think they can win because they think I'm a scared old man with no resources and no fight. They're wrong on every count. What do we need? An independent medical evaluation. The most comprehensive cognitive assessment available. Character witnesses people who've known me for decades and can testify to my mental acuity. And Marcus, we need to go on offense. We can't just defend the trust. We need to attack their credibility." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we prove this was fraud from the beginning. We prove Austin married Vanessa for the land, that the incompetency petition was always their backup plan, and that every move they've made since the engagement has been part of a coordinated scheme to steal my property." "That's a serious allegation, Leonard." "I have serious evidence." And I did. Clayton's report documenting Austin's inquiries to multiple real estate firms. The timeline showing his interest in development potential predating the wedding by months. The fact that he'd specifically asked about subdivision possibilities for a property he had no legal claim to. But I needed more. I needed the kind of evidence that would make a judge sit up and take notice. The kind that doesn't just suggest wrongdoing, but proves it beyond any reasonable doubt. The breakthrough came from a place I never expected. I was in town at the hardware store, picking up irrigation parts, when Jack Morrison appeared at my elbow. Jack was a local realtor I'd known casually for years, the kind of guy who shows up at every community event, knows everybody, and remembers everything. "Leonard, heard about your legal situation." He glanced around, lowered his voice. "I thought you should know Austin Preston came to see me back in April. Wanted a detailed analysis of your land's development potential. Specifically asked about converting 22 acres into luxury residential lots. Do you have records of that conversation?" "Better than records, I have emails. He was very specific about timelines, Leonard. Said the property would be in family hands by summer and ready for development discussions by fall." Jack's expression hardened. He wrote that in April, 2 weeks before his wedding. 2 weeks before his wedding. While Vanessa was choosing flowers and rehearsing vows, her fiancé was emailing realtors about demolishing her father's vineyard. The cruelty of it wasn't in the greed I could understand. The cruelty was in the casualness. The way he'd been planning the destruction of my life's work with the same breezy efficiency he probably used to plan business lunches. Marcus filed a counterpetition the same week. We alleged that Austin Preston had entered into marriage with Vanessa Cooper for the specific purpose of gaining access to property he intended to develop for personal profit. We attached everything: the emails from Jack, the appraiser statements, Clayton's detailed report, the timeline showing Austin's interest in development predating the engagement. Then Marcus did something brilliant. He subpoenaed Austin's phone records and email accounts for the entire period between the engagement and the wedding. The hearing was set for late July. I arrived at the Napa County Courthouse feeling every one of my 64 years, wearing the suit Enzo had tailored for the wedding, and wondering how my life had narrowed to this fighting, my own daughter in a wood-paneled room over land I'd spent my life cultivating. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go. The story was supposed to be simple. You work hard, you build something, you leave it to your child, they carry it forward. That was the contract. That was the deal every parent makes with the future. But the future had other plans. The Prestons arrived with a legal battalion, 3 attorneys from Whitmore, in suits that probably cost more than my truck, plus a paralegal wheeling a cart of documents. Roger walked in like he owned the building. Charlotte positioned herself in the gallery, dressed for a society luncheon, her face arranged in an expression of practiced concern. And Vanessa sat between Austin and his mother, pale and rigid, not once looking in my direction. Judge Margaret Chen read through both petitions with the methodical focus of a woman who'd spent 20 years on the bench and had developed an immune system against theatrical lawyering. When she finished, she looked up. "Mr. Wade, you're alleging fraud." Marcus stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We have documented evidence that Mr. Austin Preston initiated his relationship with Ms. Vanessa Cooper with the specific intent of acquiring her inheritance. The marriage was a business transaction disguised as a personal relationship." Whitmore's lead attorney was on his feet before Marcus finished. "Your Honor, These are baseless accusations designed to distract from the real issue, Mr. Cooper's deteriorating mental condition and his irrational decision to disinherit his only child. Then let's examine that mental condition, Judge Chen said. I'm ordering an independent psychiatric evaluation of Mr. Cooper by a court-appointed physician. And Mr. Wade, I'm granting your discovery motion. Mr. Preston's communications are subject to full subpoena. Austin's face went rigid. I watched Roger lean over to whisper furiously to their lead attorney. His neck flushed the color of overripe Merlot. Charlotte's composed expression cracked for the first time, a hairline fracture of genuine alarm. We'll reconvene in 30 days, Judge Chen announced. I expect the medical evaluation completed and all requested documents produced. This court is interested in truth, not theater. In the hallway afterward, Roger intercepted me. His face was controlled, but his eyes were volcanic, the eyes of a man who wasn't accustomed to being told no and didn't intend to start accepting it. You're making a terrible mistake, Cooper. We have resources you can't begin to imagine. Lawyers who specialize in dismantling people like you. I looked at him, this titan of San Francisco real estate, this monument to acquisition, this man who believed that everything had a price, including my life's work and my daughter's loyalty. Roger, I've spent 31 years growing things. You know what I've learned? You can't force growth. You can't buy maturity. And you definitely can't steal patience. I held his gaze. You're about to learn that the hard way. His face darkened, but Marcus pulled me away before the situation could escalate. In the parking lot, I sat in my truck for a long time, hands on the wheel, engine off. The battle lines were drawn. What came next would be uglier than anything so far. The psychiatric evaluation took place on August 3rd. 4 hours of cognitive testing, memory recall, problem solving, spatial reasoning, emotional assessment, administered by a court-appointed neuropsychologist named Dr. Sarah Lynn, who'd clearly been chosen for her inability to be charmed, bribed, or intimidated. I answered every question, solved every puzzle, recalled every sequence. When we finished, she reviewed her notes and looked at me over her glasses. Mr. Cooper, your cognitive function is in the 93rd percentile for your age group. No signs of dementia, no memory impairment, no evidence of diminished capacity. Your decision-making faculties are fully intact. Can you put that in writing? My report will be submitted to the court by Friday. It will be thorough. One front secured. But the Prestons were fighting a multi-front war. Within days, rumors began circulating through the Napa wine community like a disease through unprotected vines. Leonard Cooper was losing his mind. Leonard Cooper was making wild accusations against his daughter's husband. Leonard Cooper was a paranoid old man destroying his family out of spite. The source wasn't hard to trace. Charlotte Preston sat on the boards of 2 wine industry associations and had a Rolodex of connections stretching from Napa to Sonoma to San Francisco. She wielded social influence the way her husband wielded money as a weapon, precisely targeted, designed to isolate and suffocate. 2 suppliers I'd worked with for a decade stopped returning my calls. A restaurant that had carried my wine since Hang in Lermouybon canceled their standing order with a vague email about changing their portfolio. A neighbor I'd known for 20 years crossed the street when he saw me in town. Isabella was the one who said it plainly. They're trying to strangle you economically, cut off your business relationships, damage your reputation, force you to settle. Will it work? She looked at me the way she looked at a vine, showing signs of disease, clinical, assessing, already thinking about treatment. Not if you fight back, not if the evidence holds. The evidence more than held. It detonated. When Judge Chen ordered Austin's communications produced, she'd given the Prestons no room to maneuver. Their attorneys tried claiming attorney-client privilege, arguing that personal correspondence was beyond the scope, but the judge had been clear, and after a tense week of legal back and forth, the documents arrived at Marcus's office in cardboard boxes. We spent 2 days reading through Austin Preston's digital life, emails, texts, phone records, search histories, and it was all there, every calculation, every lie, every moment of cold-blooded scheming laid out in his own words. Emails to Roger, the old man sitting on at least $4 million. Vanessa's the key. Once we're married, it's just a matter of time. Texts to a business partner, weddings in May, property transfer by summer, development applications by fall. This is going to be huge. Messages to a college friend that made my stomach turn. She's not bad looking, and she worships the ground I walk on. Small price to pay for 22 acres of Napa gold. But the worst, the one that still wakes me up some nights, was an email to Roger sent 2 weeks after the wedding. Subject line, the Cooper problem. The body read, "Dad, the old man is more stubborn than expected. Vanessa can't convince him to sign. We need to consider legal options to have him declared incompetent. Mom's friend doctor, Harrison specializes in elder cognitive evaluations. Might be worth a consultation." They'd been planning the incompetency petition before I'd even created the trust. It was never a response to my legal maneuvering. It was always the plan, the backup strategy for when the old man wouldn't cooperate. Marry the daughter, pressure the father, and if he resists, have him declared mentally unfit and take the land by force. Marcus filed an emergency motion, attaching the complete email chain. By the time we finished compiling everything, we had documented evidence of fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to defraud, witness tampering. Austin had tried to pressure one of Clayton's appraisers into withdrawing his statement, a conversation the appraiser had recorded, and perjury in Vanessa's sworn affidavit about my mental decline. Judge Chen scheduled the final hearing for August 26th. The night before, I sat on my porch with a bottle of the Hangin Lamward Reserve, watching stars appear one by one over the vineyard. 31 years of work, and it had come to this: a courtroom, a judge, a stack of documents proving that my daughter had married a predator and helped him hunt her own father. Isabella found me there around 10. She sat down without asking, poured herself a glass without permission, and we sat together in the dark, the way old friends do comfortably, without the need to fill silence with sound. "You're going to win tomorrow," she said. "I know." "Then why do you look like a man who's already lost?" I thought about that for a long time. Thought about Vanessa at 6, pressing soil around a tiny vine with her bare hands. About Vanessa at 16, laughing during her first harvest, grape juice staining her arms purple to the elbow. About Vanessa last month, signing a sworn statement calling her father mentally incompetent because a man she'd known for 18 months told her to. "Because winning means proving my daughter married a monster," I said, "and lived with him long enough to help him do monstrous things. That's not the kind of victory that comes with a parade." Isabella had no answer for that. Neither did the wine, neither did the stars hanging above my vineyard, indifferent and eternal, watching the small dramas of small people play out in the dark below. Tomorrow I'd go to court. Tomorrow I'd lay out every email, every text, every documented lie. Tomorrow the Prestons would learn what happens when you try to steal from a man who's spent his life understanding that the things worth having can't be taken by force. They have to be earned through patience and time and work that never ends. But tonight I just sat there, a father on the eve of destroying the people who'd tried to destroy him, wondering whether victory and devastation were, in the end, the same thing wearing different faces. The courtroom on August 26th smelled like old wood and recycled air, and the particular tension that gathers in a room where people's lives are about to be permanently rearranged. I arrived early, old habit, the same instinct that put me in the vineyard before dawn every morning. You show up first. You stand on the ground before anyone else gets there. You don't let them set the terms of the space. Marcus was already seated at our table, his files arranged with the surgical precision I'd come to rely on. He looked up when I sat down and gave me a single nod. Not reassurance, acknowledgement. We both knew what was about to happen, and we both knew it would be ugly in the specific way that truth is ugly when it's been buried under months of lies and is finally dragged into daylight. The Prestons arrived in formation, 3 Whitmore attorneys leading the way like an advance guard, followed by Roger in a suit that probably cost what I earned in a month, then Charlotte in pearls and composure, then Austin, and for the first time since I'd known him, he didn't look polished, he looked hunted. The skin under his eyes was dark, his jaw was tight, and his gaze moved around the courtroom with the restless energy of an animal sensing a trap. Good. He should be afraid. He should have been afraid months ago. Vanessa came last. She walked in alone, separated from the Preston formation by several feet that felt symbolic. She wore a simple dark dress, no designer labels that I could see, no jewelry except her wedding ring, which she kept turning on her finger the way people fidget with things they're not sure they want to keep holding. She sat down next to Austin, but her body was angled slightly away from him, a small thing, the kind of thing only a father would notice. Judge Chen entered, and the room stood, and then we began. Marcus presented our case with the methodical clarity of a man who understood that the most powerful weapon in a courtroom isn't drama, it's evidence. He started with the timeline, walking the judge through Austin's interest in my property from the very beginning. The initial real estate inquiries in January, 3 months before the engagement. The emails to developers in February. The appraisal shopping in March. The engagement in April. Each date landed like a nail being driven into a coffin, building a structure of premeditation so clear that even the Whitmore attorneys stopped objecting and just sat there, watching their case disintegrate. Then came the emails. Marcus had selected them carefully, not all of them, just the ones that told the story with maximum clarity and minimum clutter. He read them aloud in a measured voice that made the words sound even worse than they were, because when you strip away context and read a man's private calculations about monetizing another person's life in open court, the ugliness speaks for itself. The old man's sitting on at least $4 million. Vanessa's the key. I watched Austin's face as his own words were recited back to him. He'd gone the color of old ash gray, drained, lifeless. His left hand gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. Beside him, Vanessa had stopped turning her ring. She sat perfectly still, staring at the table in front of her, and I could see the moment each email landed a small flinch, barely visible, like someone being struck by something they can't see. She's not bad looking, and she worships the ground I walk on. Small price to pay for 22 acres of Napa gold. Vanessa's hand went to her mouth. Charlotte, in the gallery behind them, made a sound like air escaping a tire, a thin, involuntary hiss of someone watching their careful construction collapse. Marcus moved to the email about the Cooper problem. He read it slowly, deliberately, letting every word occupy its full space in the room. The plan to have me declared incompetent. The mention of Charlotte's friend, a psychiatrist who could be useful. The casual discussion of legal strategies to strip an elderly man of his autonomy and his property, written in the breezy tone of someone planning a business lunch. This email, Marcus said, addressing the judge, was sent 2 weeks after the wedding, before Mr. Cooper created his trust, before the Prestons had any reason to question his mental capacity. The incompetency petition was never a response to the trust. It was always the plan. A predetermined strategy to seize property through a combination of marriage fraud and elder abuse. Whitmore's lead attorney stood for what I assume was supposed to be a vigorous defense, but there's only so much you can do when your client's own correspondence has built the prosecution's case for them. He argued context. He argued that emails taken in isolation could be misleading. He argued that Austin's interest in the property was natural given his background in real estate investment and didn't constitute fraud. Judge Chen listened with the expression of a woman who'd heard every variety of legal maneuvering in her 20 years on the bench and had long ago lost patience with the creative ones. "Counselor," she said when he finished, "are you suggesting that Mr. Preston's detailed plans to subdivide and develop a property he had no legal claim to, documented in his own words months before the marriage, were merely casual observations?" "Your Honor, my client's professional interest in—" "I've heard enough." Then came the recording. David Torres, the appraiser Austin had tried to intimidate into withdrawing his statement, had recorded the phone call legally, in accordance with California's two-party consent law, because Torres had informed Austin the call was being recorded, and Austin, in his arrogance, hadn't cared. The audio played through the courtroom speakers, tinny but clear. Austin's voice, stripped of its usual polish, threatening professional consequences if Torres testified. The casual menace of a man accustomed to getting his way through pressure. "That recording," Judge Chen said into the silence that followed, "constitutes witness tampering, which is a felony in the state of California." Roger Preston shifted in his seat. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked uncertain. Not afraid men like Roger don't process fear the way normal people do, but uncertain, like a chess player who's just realized the board has been rearranged when he wasn't looking. The ruling took less than 10 minutes. Judge Chen spoke without notes, her voice carrying the particular weight of authority exercised by someone who has no interest in being liked and every interest in being right. The petition to invalidate Mr. Cooper's irrevocable trust is denied. The independent psychiatric evaluation confirms that Mr. Cooper's cognitive function is in the 93rd percentile for his age group. There is no credible evidence of mental impairment. She paused, looking directly at Austin. Furthermore, this court finds clear and convincing evidence of a coordinated scheme to defraud Mr. Leonard Cooper of his property through a combination of marriage fraud, attempted elder abuse, and witness intimidation. The trust stands as written. This matter is concluded. Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Preston, I am referring the evidence of witness tampering, conspiracy to defraud, and perjury to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. I strongly suggest you retain criminal defense counsel. And Ms. Preston, she turned to Vanessa, and her voice softened by exactly 1 degree. You signed an affidavit under oath, attesting to your father's mental decline. That affidavit has been contradicted by every piece of medical evidence before this court. I suggest you consider very carefully the choices that led you to this moment. The gavel came down. It was over. We filed into the hallway and immediately walked into a wall of reporters. The story had leaked court staff, probably, or maybe just the gravitational pull of a story this good, and the local press had descended with the enthusiasm of people who'd been handed a narrative that wrote itself. Wealthy family schemes to steal elderly farmers' vineyard through marriage fraud. It had everything: villains, a victim, documented proof, a satisfying reversal, the kind of story that travels. Mr. Cooper, is it true the Prestons tried to steal your land? Mr. Preston, did you marry for the inheritance? How does it feel to know your son-in-law was planning to bulldoze your vineyard? I said nothing. Walked to my truck with my head down, Marcus at my side. But I watched the Prestons navigate the gauntlet, Roger trying to project authority while cameras captured every crack in his composure. Charlotte clutching her bag against her body like a shield, her social armor useless against the indignity of public exposure. Austin hiding behind his attorneys, unable to meet a single lens, the man who'd planned everything reduced to a figure scurrying for cover. And Vanessa, walking alone, behind them all, separate and exposed, no one holding her hand, no one running interference. The Prestons had already begun the process of cutting her loose, and it showed in the space between her and them, a gap that widened with every step, every camera flash, every shouted question. She looked up once, just before she reached the car. Our eyes met across the parking lot, and in that half-second, I saw something I hadn't seen in over a year. My daughter. Not the performer, not the social climber, not the stranger who'd signed documents calling me incompetent. The girl underneath all of that, frightened, lost, beginning to understand the full dimension of what she'd done and what had been done to her. Then she got in the car and was gone. The story broke like a wave. The Napa Valley Register ran it the next morning. By afternoon it had spread to the San Francisco Chronicle, then to wine industry publications, then to business journals, then to the particular corners of the internet where stories about wealthy people behaving badly achieve a kind of viral immortality. Roger's real estate empire began hemorrhaging clients within days. 3 major developments were put on hold, 2 partners withdrew. The San Francisco Business Council removed him from their board with a tersely worded statement about maintaining organizational integrity. Austin's investment practice collapsed faster. His clients, wealthy individuals who valued discretion the way other people value oxygen, pulled their accounts with the silent efficiency of money moving away from danger. Within 2 weeks, he'd lost 70% of his portfolio. His office quietly closed. His professional reputation, carefully built over a decade on his father's connections, evaporated like morning fog. Charlotte's social world, the museums, the charities, the boards, the luncheons, the entire architecture of status she'd spent her life constructing went dark. Invitations stopped arriving. Phone calls went unreturned. The society pages that had once chronicled her philanthropy now documented her family's disgrace with the same breathless attention they'd once given her triumphs. I took no pleasure in any of it. I want to be honest about that. There's a version of this story where the old man watches his enemies burn and feels righteous satisfaction, where revenge tastes sweet and justice feels clean. That's not how it works. Watching the Prestons' world crumble felt necessary but not good. Like amputating a diseased limb, you do it because you have to, not because it brings you joy. 3 weeks after the hearing, my phone rang at 2 a.m. Vanessa. Her voice was wrecked, the voice of someone who's been crying for so long that the tears have become a kind of weather, constant and inescapable. Dad, Austin filed for divorce. He said I didn't deliver what I promised. Those were his exact words. Didn't deliver. I sat up in bed, the darkness of my room pressing in around me. I'm sorry you're hurting. The Prestons are telling everyone it was my idea, that I targeted Austin for his family's money. Charlotte called me a gold digger at a charity event. Roger's lawyers are threatening to sue me for damages. They're making me the villain of the whole story. Of course they were. The Prestons were expert operators even in defeat. When the ship sinks, you find someone else to blame for the water. And Vanessa, isolated, abandoned, stripped of every alliance she'd traded her family to acquire, made the perfect scapegoat. "Then you understand," I said quietly, "how it feels to be thrown away by people who claim to love you, to have your name destroyed by people you trusted." Silence on the line. Then, very small, "Daddy, can I come home?" The word hit me somewhere deep and primal. Daddy. She hadn't called me that in over a year. It was the word of a child seeking safety, and despite everything, the betrayal, the lies, the signed affidavit, the wedding dismissal, the $50,000 demand, some part of me responded to it the way soil responds to rain. Automatically, without decision. But I'd learned something about patience in the past 6 months, about the difference between softness and wisdom, about how the most loving thing you can do for someone isn't always the thing that feels kind in the moment. "Not yet," I said. "You made choices, Vanessa. Conscious, deliberate choices. You don't get to run home just because those choices had consequences." I hung up, sat in the dark, listened to the vineyard breathing outside my window, the ancient, patient sound of things growing at their own pace, indifferent to human urgency. I'd drawn a line, the hardest line I'd ever drawn, and I didn't know if it would save my daughter or lose her forever. She appeared on my doorstep in mid-September, when the light in Napa turns gold and the air carries the sweet weight of ripening grapes. No BMW she'd sold it, or Austin's lawyers had taken it, or both. She arrived in an Uber, wearing jeans and an old college sweater I recognized from a decade ago. No makeup. No performance. Just a woman standing on a porch, with a small suitcase and red eyes, and her wedding ring held in her hand like a piece of evidence she was finally ready to examine honestly. "Dad," she said, just that. I looked at her for a long time. Looked for the stranger who'd told me to leave her wedding. Looked for the woman who'd signed papers calling me incompetent. Looked for the girl who'd helped me plant vines at 6 years old and asked if they'd grow into magic beanstalks. I found all three. That was the complicated truth. They were all the same person. People aren't just one thing. They're every choice they've ever made, stacked on top of each other. And sometimes the weight of the bad choices is what finally forces them to reach for something better. "Come in," I said. We sat at the kitchen table. I made coffee. She told me everything, the divorce, the legal threats, Charlotte's public cruelty, the systematic way the Prestons had erased her from their world once she stopped being useful. She told me about the loneliness of the past 3 months, how she'd wake up in an empty apartment surrounded by expensive things that meant nothing, understanding for the first time that she'd traded something real for something hollow, and the trade couldn't be reversed with a phone call or an apology. I was stupid, Dad, unforgivably stupid. After Mom died, I felt like I was drowning. And when Austin appeared with his perfect family and his perfect life, I thought if I could just fit into their world, I'd stop hurting. I thought belonging somewhere, anywhere, would fill the hole. "But you already belonged somewhere," I said. "Here, with me, with this land." "I know." And by the time I realized it, I'd already burned everything down. She wiped her eyes. "I chose status over family, money over love. I chose people who saw me as a tool over the one person who saw me as a daughter." We sat in silence. The afternoon light was doing something beautiful to the vineyard outside the window, turning the rows of vines into lines of amber and green, the grapes hanging heavy and almost ready. "Is there any way back?" she asked. I thought about the trust, about the conditions I'd written not as punishment, but as a test, a way to separate what's real from what's performed, a way to know, finally and definitively, whether my daughter cared about this place or just about what it was worth. "There's a way," I said. "But it's not easy, and it's not quick. The trust has conditions. 5 years working this vineyard, not visiting, working, living here, learning every part of what I do. Pruning, irrigation, fermentation, bottling, harvest to harvest, season to season, no shortcuts." 5 years, she repeated. "And the land can't be sold for 15 years after that. If either condition is broken, everything goes to charity." She absorbed this, looked out the window, at the vineyard, 22 acres of work and patience and love stretching up the hillside. I tried to see it through her eyes. 5 years of physical labor. Early mornings and sore muscles and dirt under her fingernails and modest living and none of the glamour she'd spent the last year chasing. "You're asking me to prove I care about this place more than the money." "No, I'm asking you to actually care about this place more than the money. Not prove it, become it. There's a difference. The longest silence of my life followed. Or maybe it just felt that way. She stared at the vineyard, and I stared at her. And between us, the entire history of our family, the planting, the growing, the harvesting, the losing, the grieving, the slow, patient work of building something that outlasts you hung in the air like the scent of ripe grapes on an autumn evening. "When do I start?" she asked. "Tomorrow. Harvest begins next week. You'll be here for every day of it." Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, not quite determination, but something in the territory of both. Something that reminded me, for the first time in a very long time, of the girl who'd knelt in the dirt at 6 years old and pressed soil around a tiny vine with her bare hands. "Mom helped plant the eastern section," I said, as we walked out into the vineyard that evening. "You were 6. You dug holes with a trowel while she and I set the rootstock." "I remember," Vanessa said softly. "I asked if they'd grow into magic beanstalks. And I told you they'd grow into something better, something real." We stood there as the sun dropped below the hills, turning the valley into a bowl of gold and shadow. The vines around us were heavy with fruit, weeks away from harvest, 31 years of patience made visible in every cluster. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear Isabella's tractor, another farmer, preparing for another season, the rhythm of work that had sustained this valley for generations and would sustain it long after all of us were gone. "Those 3 words," Vanessa said, "when I called demanding money and you said, 'See you in court,' that was the moment everything changed, wasn't it? It was the moment I stopped being your victim and started being your father again. The moment I chose to protect what I'd built instead of letting it be taken from me." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm glad you did, even though it hurt, even though it cost us both so much." I looked at my daughter, broken, humbled, standing in the dirt of the vineyard where she'd grown up, finally ready to learn the lessons I'd spent her whole life trying to teach. Lessons about patience, about work, about the difference between value and price, about the fact that the things worth having in this life can't be rushed or bought or stolen. They have to be grown, slowly, carefully, with hands in the soil and faith in the process. "Grapes take time," I said. "You can't rush fermentation. You can't shortcut aging. You can't force something beautiful into existence. It has to happen at its own pace, in its own season." "Like trust," she said. "Like trust." The vineyard stretched around us in the gathering dark, vines rustling in the evening breeze, the land patient and enduring beneath our feet. Tomorrow my daughter would wake up early for the first time in years. She'd pull on boots and walk the rows with me the way she'd done as a child. She'd learn or relearn what it means to build something with your hands, something that takes years to mature and a lifetime to perfect. Maybe she'd make it. Maybe the 5 years would transform her, the way time and pressure transform grape juice into wine. Maybe she'd find her way back to who she was before the Prestons convinced her that who she was wasn't enough. Or maybe she wouldn't. Maybe the work would be too hard, the sacrifice too great, the pull of an easier life too strong. I couldn't know. That was her choice to make, her season to navigate. But the land would be here either way. The vines would keep growing. The grapes would keep ripening every autumn, waiting to be harvested by whoever cared enough to do the work. That was the promise I'd made 31 years ago when I'd pressed the first rootstock into Napa soil, and it was the promise the trust would keep long after I was gone, that some things in this world are worth more than their price, that patience outlasts greed, and that the best things in life aren't inherited or stolen or bought. They're grown, one season at a time, with dirt under your fingernails and faith that the harvest will come.